would have liked to shown you on the screen, but any of you use the Memcached functions for MySQL? The whole idea of it is basically this. Normally you have your connectivity to Memcached in MySQL or whatever database. You have two handles or two connection objects inside of your application, PHP, Perl, or whatever you're using. The way the Memcached functions for MySQL work is they're user-defined functions, and they allow you to interact with MySQL from within the database. This allows you to do things like put triggers on your table. So if you insert something into that table, the trigger calls the memc set function, puts it in Memcached. Same thing with delete and updates as well. And you can also query a table. So you have a table that simply just has the IDs for your keys that you store in Memcached. You can do a query on that, and the aggregate query will do fetches for each one of those. So it allows you to essentially be able to interact with Memcached from one location, the database. Say, and if you perhaps maybe you have an application you're using that doesn't have an adapter and a Memcached yet, which really isn't a problem anymore, but there was a time when there weren't clients for Memcached in every single language. And it allows you to have some form of integration. Somebody asked me on the Memcached mailing list, they said, is there something, I understand that there's an automatic way for me to get everything from MySQL to Memcached. Is there another way to do, have it go automatically from Memcached to MySQL? Well, there isn't exactly anything like that, but what you can do is, I finished a book back in July, and in that book I had this application that I wrote, and it's up on Launchpad. I can send out the link. It's called Narada, and one of the functionalities of Narada was that it would go out, you would go into a web page and you'd put a URL in there and submit it. That would cause the mod Perl application to call a Gearman worker through Gearman and say, go out and fetch this thing. And so this Gearman worker would go out and fetch the content for that page, stick it in Memcached, and put a really simple entry in a simple catalog table. The catalog table would have the ID for that key of what you stored in Memcached. And then there was a trigger on that table, and that trigger would insert for each insert. It would check to see what the count was on that table, and if the count exceeded some number, it would then call another worker to pull those out of Memcached and then stash them in the database. And what this basically made, the traditional design of your application would be, I do all of this from the mod Perl app, the PHP app, or whatever app. This allowed it to kind of split it up with the Gearman worker. And it would also create some kind of a automatic way for what gets stuffed in Memcached to make its way to MySQL somehow or other, whatever interval you wanted it to happen. But and that you can control by how many what number of inserts will I use to make it so that I go into Memcached and pull it out and put it in the database. And it worked out pretty well. And the code's out there. You can look at it and see how it's done. That's basically essentially what there is. There are also, for Postgres, there's PG Memcached, and there are functions for Postgres that allow you to do the same. As well as there's a Java DB implementation for these two that I don't know much about Java DB. I have my colleagues at Northscale sent me some information on it, and I haven't used PG Memcached before, but the idea is basically the same, that you have these functions inside your database that you can use to pull things out of Memcached or store things in Memcached. Not store, but put. There's always, Dustin Stallings, who I work with, says you don't really store things in a cache, and he's kind of right. But that's basically it. Do you guys have any questions, or? Pardon?
What's the Memcached library called?
Oh, the library for Memcached that I use to build these on is libmemcached.
Well, I mean, what is this thing called?
Oh, the MySQL functions. It's Memcached functions for MySQL, and it's on Launchpad. PG Memcached, I'm not sure where that's hosted at. I can send out all this information if you guys want. My email address is patg@patg.net or patrick.galbraith@northscale.com. But these functions have been around for a while, and you can get them from Launchpad, or just do a Google search, they'll come up. And I just added some new functionality. Do any of you use the cast function in Memcached? I just created a function where you can get the cast value of something. I had a cast set value function that you had to have the cast value, and I never realized that I had nothing to provide that cast value. So now you can fetch it for a given item, given the key. Any other questions?
Connection handling is how Memcached behind the scenes. Is it a persistent connection, or does it go?
Yes, it's a persistent connection. Basically, what you do, you're in your MySQL prompt or in your application. You do memcached set servers, and you set your list of servers as you would inside of, you know, your PECL memcache or your cache memcache Perl connection, and you set your servers, and then from that point on, you can make calls to Memcached. And there's a persistent connection, and each time your application creates a new thread in MySQL, it uses that same connection. I'm working on a fix that Trond Norby made available that basically uses a pool of connections instead of a single connection, because right now I use a single connection, and I realized that doesn't lend itself well to scaling. So he created this pool object where, you know, the more connections that it needs, it keeps allocating more. And that'll be out soon. But anyway, in your application or in a MySQL client, you do connect, and then from that point on, you can make calls to whatever, you know, whether you want to do a delete, an update, an increment, a replace, an add, stats. Stats is find out all the stats or a specific stat. And that's basically it. It's really simple. It's just Memcached is simple, and basically it gives you all the same operations you have with Memcached inside of MySQL, and likewise in Postgres. Other questions? Any Memcached questions? We have Zazzle authentication now, SASL. That allows you to have some sort of security on your Memcached instances. It uses a Zazzle database file where you set up basically the user and the password, and you have to provide that in order to connect and have subsequent operations on Memcached. Whereas before, Memcached didn't have anything. Anybody could connect anytime. That's basically it. If you guys have any questions about it?
I'm not sure if I follow the architecture. I mean, traditionally the way I understand Memcached is you have a bunch of, you know, you have your MySQL servers, Memcached. So like you'd have your client, your application servers, and then Memcached, and then your database.
I can show you all the stuff. If
so how do you say it's inside MySQL?
It's not really inside. But what it does is it makes MySQL your central, or Postgres, your central point to interact with Memcached. You don't have to. You could also still do things within your application. But if you, for instance, you have this table, and you know all the time that you want to cache everything that's put into this table, instead of having to explicitly do it in your application, you put a trigger on that table. So anytime an insert happens, you know, it'll also do a memcached set. You can do it whatever way you want. You can, you know, you can do whatever number of columns you want. The way I've seen it, that I showed inside of my book, was that you had some sort of namespace. And for me, I used the name of the table, colon the column, and then the record ID, and then whatever, you know, values I wanted. So if you had a table called users, for instance, and you wanted all your users cached so that when the user logs in, you don't have to hit the database every time. You would basically do a memcached set for each column with that you know, for instance, you'd have first name. It would be user's first name ID of what's being inserted. Same thing with last name, and so on and so forth. And then you could also, likewise, instead of having to query the table for the data, you just query the table for the IDs, which is much. you can basically what you end up doing is you can make it so that your database is kind of an organizational framework for your cache. You use MySQL because it's fast on lookups, but you have all of your data inside of the cache that you want to have available for queries that you don't want to kill your database on. And you can have just fast what I call them are catalog tables for looking up the data. It's just one way of doing it. I mean, you might not want to do it that way. You might want to have it in your application, but it gives you the option to move your Memcached logic down into your database connection. Whereas normally you'd have it, your application up here, and you'd have database connection, a Memcached connection, and you would check here. You check here first. If it's not there, then you go here. Well, you could do a lot of that down here. You could even do it with a stored procedure if that's how you like doing it.
So it's like MySQL is talking to Memcached
and doing the work for you.
Yeah.
And say, for instance, you don't want to have a lot of that exposed to certain developers. You want it to just get the data. And you could put all get the data from the database. Some people believe, the database is real simple. We don't want to push all that intelligence down there, but this is just another way of doing it. These are also available for Drizzle now, too. They don't have as many functions, but I'm going to add more functions. So we've got Drizzle, MySQL, Postgres, and the JavaDB, which I know nothing about. Maybe some of you do, I don't know. I'm not a big Java guy, but and they're built on top of the Memcached. When you build it, you basically specify where the lib directory is in MySQL. That's where it installs the .so, the shareable library. So when the function is loaded, it knows where to find it. You also tell it where MySQL config is. I don't even think I need to have that in there. I could take that out, but you need libmemcache installed on your system because it does need to link against that. And that's the C library, and that's what a lot of the connectors are now built on, except for Java and some of the other ones. They're built around. Like I know PECL Memcache for PHP is built on top of it. But that's basically it, how they work. Well, I hope that's helpful. I'm sorry I didn't have any slides here to show. I've got all kinds of slides and examples. I've given a talk at the users conference. And I even had somebody spend some time this week preparing it. Pardon? Where I have my project, yeah. I don't know where PG Memcache is, and I can put my slides up there too, available. I think Google Docs. I don't know. I've never shared Google Doc document with everybody before, but I could. I could convert it to PDF or something like that. And if you check my blog, captaintofu.livejournal.com, I post about it all the time and give examples on how to use it. Northscale has a lot of posts too. I just did a post on how to set up Zazzle with Memcached. We have all of the different team members. Dustin, who's a maintainer of Memcached, one of the maintainers, posts a lot of things on there as well.
How does the performance compare to traditional Memcached? I mean, is it equivalent or?
With Zazzle?
Well, no, just using putting Memcached sort of behind the database.
Well, a lot of it has to do with the performance of the database and how it's performing, but it should be just as fast as your PHP client is. The one thing that I don't have that's kind of an irritant for me, as you know, I don't know if you know, UDFs only allow you to retrieve one value. And one of the nice features of Memcached is to be able to do a multi-get. And there's really no way to do a multi-get in MySQL with the UDFs. So if you get a bunch of keys, it's going to be doing a call for each one. And that's kind of a shortcoming. It's not so much a shortcoming of the functions, but of how UDFs work. They return one value. If I could return a record set, that would be really nice, because then I could do a multi-get. But there's currently no way to do that. There is a Memcached storage engine that Brian wrote. I don't know how well maintained it is, and I think it might be being ported to Drizzle. He would know the status on that. And that allows you to basically run SQL queries against a Memcached instance. I haven't used it much before, and I don't know exactly how it works, but I'm guessing it's a similar concept. That's why Brian originally started writing libmemcached, is because he didn't like the existing client libraries that were out there already. He wanted something faster, so. But that's. Any other Memcached questions? Caching questions? Tokyo questions? I know a little bit about Tokyo. Perl? What language do most people here in program in? Huh? PHP. Java. So you might know about Java maybe. Yeah, I'm a Pro guy originally, but I'm working on a PHP book of all things right now. Because I needed a guy who I worked with at Lycos got a book deal, but they wanted somebody who had already written a book on there. So I said I'll do some of the sections that are heavy PHP stuff. But I find that if you do Perl, that going to PHP is not that difficult. Syntactically, it's similar. Going to Ruby is. We have a lot of Ruby and Python people where I work, and I feel a little bit lost. I mean, it's all the same thing, really, when you boil it all down. They're all doing similar things, but Dustin Sollings, who works at Northscale, does the Spy Memcached client, and that has a lot of neat features. That has he has some sort of a front cache on there and deduping and things like that. And that's also what the Memcached proxy Moxie, which we have available, provides. It provides, for instance, if you're requesting all the same keys, it can kind of conglomerate it so that it's only one request. And then it also has kind of a front-end cache where you have hot keys. So instead of going all the way to the Memcached pool, it comes right out of Moxie if they're commonly requested keys. And it allows you to manage all of your connections from within Moxie instead of having to have all of this code inside your application. I'm going to be adding more features to it as well. So I think I blabbered enough. Feel free to ask questions. Thank you for coming to my impromptu talk here.